The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Tulane Parents. Thank you for joining our Parent Programs webinar on our community of care for Tulane students. My name is Penny Wyatt, and I'm the Director of Orientation and Parent Programs. I'm pleased to introduce my colleague from the Department of Student Resources and Support Services, our Director of Student Conduct, Abigail Gaunt. Abby will present tonight's topic, which will cover the range of assistance and interventions provided by Student Resources and Support Services. Before I begin, I'd like to review a few instructions and reminders. This is the volume level for the webinar. You can adjust the volume level on your end with the controls on your computer. Just to test the system and make sure we're broadcasting okay, please use the raise your hand feature on your controls to let us know if you can hear and you're seeing the screen. So some other instructions I'd like to give are that we ask that you hold your questions until we've reached the end, since we're likely to address your question within the body of the presentation. We will state your questions and repeat them so that everybody can hear them, and answer that for you. And if there is a question that we need to research, we'll email that answer to everyone following the webinar. And if needed, we'll include that information in the presentation slides before it's posted on our website. I will send a PDF of the website, the webinar slides, to all the registered participants sometime tomorrow. But please allow about 5 business days for us to post the combined audio-video recording on our website. When you do want to go back and listen to that again, you can find it on our website, parents.tulane.edu. You just navigate to the Webinars tab, and you'll see it and our previous webinars listed under Webinars Archives. Now I would like to turn things over to Abby. Thank you.
Thanks, Penny, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's webinar on creating a community of care. I'm Abby Gaunt, and I'm the Director of Student Conduct here at Tulane. I would normally be co-presenting with Erica Woodley, who is the Assistant Vice President of Student Affairs and Assistant Dean of Students, but she had an unexpected conflict this evening, so she's not able to join us, but hopefully I'll be able to answer all of your questions. Also wanted to just take a moment to note that if you're at the student orientation this summer, some of this information will be new, but I think that it'll be even more relevant now that your students are on campus. So here we are in the 4th week of classes. Hopefully your students are adjusting well, but if they aren't, don't worry. They're not alone, and we're going to be talking tonight about a lot of resources that are available to help them get connected on campus and be successful here. So the purpose of this webinar is really to make sure that you know who you can contact if you have concerns, and to make sure that you understand how our community of care works at Tulane. Just trying to figure out how to switch pages. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to be going through some of the different offices and individuals that you may want to meet with. I'm going to be going really quickly through these people since you'll all have access to this PowerPoint. And then I'll be going into more detail what these different roles and offices do later in the presentation. So Student Resources and Support Services is the umbrella organization for a number of student support services. So that's led by Erica Woodley, and that also is made up of Julia Broussard, who's the coordinator of violence prevention and victim support services, Catherine Yockey, who's the case manager, Lori Coulter, who's the program coordinator, and then we have the office of the Goldman Office of Disability Services. The director there is Patrick Randolph, and the assistant director is Shauna Foose. And then we also have the Office of Student Conduct. That's my office, and I'm the director, and Jenna Ray-Brusillo is the assistant director. There are a couple of other important contacts that we want to make sure you had information for. Michelle Olking, who is the director of academic success coaching, and we're going to be talking a lot about that in a little bit. Desiree Anderson, who is the assistant director of multicultural affairs. Red Trammell, the director of office and gender and sexual diversity, and Liz Schaefer in the director of fraternity and sorority programs. And I understand that later on in the year there'll be a webinar with Liz to talk more about that office. Finally, some additional folks that you should really know are the community directors in housing and residence life. We often hear from parents who want to get in touch with their student's RA. We'd really encourage you to get in touch with your student's community director rather than an RA. The main reason for this is that if you have a concern that's serious enough where you want to reach out to the RA, we would prefer that you talk with a professional staff member. Each building on campus is assigned a community director who is a master's level, and they oversee that entire residential community. So an example might be that if your student is having a roommate issue, that you may want to encourage your student to go talk to the community director. And if they're reluctant to do so, then you may want to do that on their behalf. So that gets us to what is a community of care. When we talk about this, we're really talking about an environment where people treat each other with respect and look out for one another. And so what we're hoping happens with this community of care is that if there's ever a point where your student needs some extra support, there's a community of people working together to make sure that we find out that they need that support and then are able to get it to them. So some of the different offices that are part of this community that can really help make sure that your student is successful, I'm going to be touching on in some detail. First, academic support. So first starting with academic advising. This is something every student is assigned an advisor. There are 20 full-time advisors. So that's a ratio of about 1 to 250. We really recommend that every student meet with their advisor once a semester. It is possible for students to make sure that they're staying on track of what they need for their major for graduation on their own. But that's not going to take the place of that one-on-one meeting. Another resource that's really excellent that you may have heard about at orientation is the Academic Success Center. So they provide a lot of different services. What is academic success coaching? And this is a one-on-one coaching meeting with a professional staff member, and it's really helpful for students who may need a little extra help staying organized, staying on top of their tasks, and keeping on track with their assignments. They also offer peer coaching, which is basically the same thing, except that that coach is a peer. We've found that some students really respond well to this coaching from peers more than the staff members, and so for those students, this can be an attractive option. And then supplemental instruction. They offer supplemental instruction in some of the typically more challenging courses that are commonly taken by our students. And what these, this supplemental instruction is a weekly review session that is facilitated by a peer educator. Students who are attending that supplemental instruction can collaborate together to improve their performance. There's also some individual and group tutoring that's available. It is really important for students to be proactive about taking advantage of these resources. What we often find is that students wait until they've gotten themselves really far down a hole and they're going to have a hard time getting out of it before they seek out these resources. And so that's really a place where you as a parent can come in and encourage them to reach out to these resources at this point, at this point in the semester before, when they're still going to be in a position to really take full advantage of them. The final academic support that we wanted to mention is the Tulane Interdisciplinary Experience Seminars. This is called TIDES, and your student may have mentioned this to you. All first-year students take a TIDES course, and these are small classes, and they have an academic focus, but they're also really designed to make sure that that our students are having an additional opportunity to meet students and a faculty member in a smaller group that's outside of the residential setting. And a lot of students can make a connection with that faculty member or with their peers in the class through that course. So if your students struggling to connect socially, that may be something you want to ask them about. How's your TIDES class? And so that's another real service that's offered for our students. Moving on to the medical and physical health support services. I think that in August there was a webinar that the Student Health Center put on that goes into a lot of detail about some of these services, but just wanted to touch on it to reemphasize that and also make sure those of you who weren't there are aware of these resources. So Tulane University has a student health center on our uptown campus, and this offers primary care services, a women's health clinic, a men's health clinic, and a physician on call. And that physician is on call 24/7, and the number is on the Student Health Center website. They also offer a pharmacy. Some things to know about the pharmacy: it accepts only student health insurance. They will fill out-of-state prescriptions. Rite Aid and Walgreens are also in walking distance, so if your student doesn't have student health insurance, then they can go to those stores. We also have an agreement for prescription delivery, and the information on that service is provided on the PowerPoint. And then finally, we offer another service of Tulane Emergency Medical Services, which is abbreviated as TEMS. That's a 24/7 student-run EMT service, and they will transport students to local emergency rooms as needed, and they'll respond and evaluate and determine if what level of treatment is necessary. They're students, but they're excellent. The level of service that they provide is really top-notch. The next service is the Counseling and Psychological Services. This is abbreviated as CAPS. CAPS provides short-term and crisis counseling for all Tulane students. This is an excellent resource if your student is struggling with the adjustment to college, or down the road if they're experiencing a difficult breakup or something is going on at home that really requires some short-term assistance, or if they just sound like they're really stressed. Ask them if they've been to CAPS. So it's short-term. If you think your student would need something more intensive or they prefer to go off campus, you or they can get in touch with CAPS or with one of the Student Resources and Support Services staff members to get a list of off-campus providers. They offer a number of different services, individual, couples, group therapy. There's a single intake process. They have extended hours. They're designed to meet the student schedules, and obviously there's some increased staffing during the times of year that are typically particularly stressful exam time. So then the next thing I want to talk about is the process of care and how basically a lot of different offices on campus are working together to make sure that we're responding to incident reports that we receive in a timely and effective manner. So we have multiple layers of on-call professionals that are working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to make sure that, that there's prompt follow-up when there are incidents. The on-call professionals, who the first level of reporting are the members from the Office of Housing and Residence Life, will be notified whenever there's an incident. They're on call 24 hours a day. And they will respond as appropriate, and in some cases, particularly more serious incidents. For example, if a student is transported to a hospital for an illness or injury, or a student's arrested, or there's any type of crime, they're going to notify the SRSS staff member on call who's going to respond. And those are ones where we anticipate that there's really going to be either an extended period of follow-up that's really a more serious incident, or where we may be needing to notify parents, or where there's any type of safety or health concern. The level of follow-up is going to vary depending on the incident. And so there's some cases where there may need to be some immediate follow-up, but after that initial follow-up, nothing else needs to take place. There's some cases where it may not present an immediate concern, but really indicates the need for some more ongoing follow-up. And then there's some cases, of course, that, that require both that immediate response and the ongoing follow-up. I also want to mention the TUPD community policing. The professionals on call are working very closely with TUPD, and TUPD is responding as the initial responder in any case where that's appropriate. And the professional on call is really there as an additional support to conduct any follow-up with individual students. Some resources that TUPD provides is shuttles, and I believe those are offered from 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. And they also have an escort service. You can find more information about the details for how your child can take advantage of those services on TUPD's website. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about student resources and support services and what we do here. We offer a number of different services that are overseen by Erica Woodley. There's the Office of Case Management and Behavioral Intervention, the Office of Violence Prevention and Victim Support Services, the Tulane Legal Assistance Program, or TULAP, the Office of Student Conduct, and the Goldman Office of Disability Services. The offices that I just mentioned aren't part of SRSS, but we really work with all of those other offices to make sure that we're really viewing the students holistically and making sure that they're getting what they need, no matter what area of campus they need support from. Case management and behavioral intervention really comes out of Virginia Tech. After the Virginia Tech shooting, most college campuses established some type of behavioral intervention team. The focus was initially to look at threat assessments, but the reality of how the behavioral intervention teams work is that the majority of the time is actually spent trying to connect students to resources. And it's a multidisciplinary team that reviews student cases and coordinates comprehensive interventions. And so the people who are sitting on that team come from a variety of areas on campus, so that there are lots of different perspectives that are being shared, and so that there's appropriate follow-up taking place. The case manager is the person who will follow up on interventions that come from the bid in order to make sure that the students are staying on track, are successful, and that nothing's falling through the cracks. So sometimes students can get overwhelmed by the processes that exist at the university, and the case manager will work with them to make sure that they're navigating internal and external processes and getting connected in whatever way they need to. This can be short-term. It could be a matter simply of a student needs to be connected to somebody, a therapist off campus, and they have a single meeting or two meetings, make that connection, and then really are set. Or it could be that a student is really seeing the case manager on a long-term basis, in some cases potentially the entire time that they're at Tulane. So those are some of the different services on the sheet that the case manager would offer. The case manager is one of the individuals who's serving in an on-call capacity. The next office is Violence Prevention and Victim Support Services. So this office really has two primary roles. One is doing outreach with students on victim prevention policy, programs, and support services. And then the second is responding to individual students who've been the victims of any type of crime. But primarily the focus is on victims of violence. The emphasis really of this role has been, at least in large part, making sure that we're complying as a university with our obligations under Title IX. Most of you may have heard of Title IX in the context of sports and the idea of that colleges need to have equality in sports programs for men and women. But Title IX really applies more broadly than that. It actually provides that, that universities and all educational institutions need to make sure that there's no discrimination on the basis of gender in their schools. That includes sexual harassment and sexual assault. And so part of the coordinator of this office's job is to make sure that any case that involves those types of reports, that the university's response is effective and appropriate, and that that student is getting the resources that they need. This role also serves in an on-call capacity. There will be one of the other student resources and support services on-call professionals. The Goldman Office of Disability Services, hopefully at this point, if your student had a 504 plan in high school, you've already looked into getting them started on the process to get accommodations at Tulane. But if you haven't, we'd really encourage you to do that now. There are a lot of students who who've got accommodations in high school and decide that they don't want to use them in college, and they then get to midterms or finals and realize that they do want those accommodations. Unfortunately, the process to get reviewed for accommodations here takes about 4 to 5 weeks. So at that point, the student may be in a position where they're not able to get those resources that they could have gotten if they'd started the process earlier. You can find information about that process on the Goldman Office of Disability Services website, or by contacting Patrick or Shauna, whose information was at the beginning. They're charged with they're responsible for ensuring that students with disabilities have the same opportunities for success as their non-disabled peers. And they'll work with faculty members on those accommodations. They also provide a distraction-free exam-taking environment. That's something a lot of students take advantage of. Starting last year, they offered short-term accommodations. So if your student breaks their arm and isn't able to take a test, or breaks their leg and needs help getting around campus, you should get in touch with the Goldman Office of Disability Services, and they can provide them with resources. I also mentioned that even if your student didn't have a 504 plan in high school, if if they get here and you hear that they are struggling to finish their assignments on time or they're having difficulty concentrating, we'd encourage you to get in touch with Patrick or Shauna as well. There are a lot of students who are able to succeed in high school and really overcome any learning disabilities that they have without ever recognizing that they have them. And then they get to college and realize and experience for the first time that they aren't able to succeed without their accommodations. So there are students who will get tested and accommodations for the first time in college. In the Office of Student Conduct, this is my office, and we administer the Code of Student Conduct, and it's really designed to be an educational process. We really hope to help students learn that that their actions carry consequences in an environment where, for most incidents, they're relatively low-risk stakes. We work closely with HRL to manage the individual cases that they'll actually hear, and we refine and revise the student code of conduct. I'm going to talk a little bit more in a minute about some of the frequent cases that we come across. We oversee everything from very minor incidents all the way up to matters that could result in suspension or expulsion. I'm not going to talk about those more serious cases because those are very rare, but I will talk about some of the things that it's possible your student could experience while they're here. Before I get to some of those, the detailed information about the conduct process, wanted to mention one additional resource in Student Resources and Support Services, and that's the TULAP program. They provide civil and criminal legal advice for free of cost for our students. These are Tulane law students who work under the supervision of criminal and civil attorneys. The assistance really for the civil cases, one of the ways your student may want to take advantage of this is when they go to live off campus. If they do, we'd encourage you to have them review their leases. They can actually bring their lease to LAP, and they will help them go over it. This program also will work with students who have been arrested. No one wants to think about their student being arrested when they're in college, and it does not happen all that often. But you should still know that if that were to happen to your student, that as long as Tulane finds out about the arrest, which we do most of the time the New Orleans Police Department will call us, we will coordinate with TULAP to make sure that the process for the student to be released begins as soon as possible. We do not want our students in central lockup any longer than they need to be. The student may have consequences both in the criminal system and through the conduct process if that were to happen. So some of the frequent policy issues that we have with our students and where we really, I think, could use assistance from our parents are violations of the alcohol and drug policies on campus. This is not to say that Tulane is any different from any other college. We're not, but it's really something that that we see happen, particularly when students are new to campus and are experimenting with figuring out how rigorously rules are enforced and enjoying the freedom of being away from home. So Tulane's alcohol policy is that no one under the age of 21 can possess or consume alcoholic beverages on campus at any time. Tulane is not a dry campus, so there are events where individuals who are 21 or over may be served alcohol, but under no circumstances can individuals under 21 possess or consume the alcohol. Open containers of alcohol are permitted in New Orleans generally, but not on Tulane's campus. And there's some other details about some of the other rules with respect to alcohol policy violations. The Drug-Free Schools and Community Act provides that it prohibits the unlawful possession, use, or distribution of illicit drugs or alcohol. And this provides to both students and employees of Tulane. And so this is both a federal policy, and it's also something that is incorporated into Tulane's Code of Student Conduct. I'd also note at this time that if a student is convicted of a federal or state drug violation, they may be found to be ineligible for federal financial aid money. That's not a Tulane policy. That's a federal policy. So just so you know, before we get to some of these consequences for violating these policies, no student is, all students who are, when we receive an incident report that a student may have violated university policy, they'll receive notice of those charges and of the date that they'll be scheduled for a meeting where they have an opportunity to be heard on this issue. So it's not as if we receive a report and assume that the student did something. We don't. We want to hear their side of the story. We know when we get a report that that's only one side, and we really want to make sure that the student understands their rights, the process, and has an opportunity to feel heard before there's any decision on those charges. If a student is found responsible for having violated university policy, then there are a number of different types of consequences that they may face. One is going to be their status with the university. I'm going to start with the least serious here, which is an admonition. This is new for this year, and what this means is that the student has been found responsible for violating university policy, but if they graduate from Tulane and don't have another incident while they're here, that matter will effectively self-expunge. They'll be graduating without any disciplinary record. So this is really a new sanction that we've developed to help encourage our students who have a minor incident when they first get here to really stay motivated to avoid having another one. We really think it'll also help reduce some of the concerns that our parents have about the students having to respond to questions for graduate school. The next step up is warning period, and that's going to be, I would basically describe that as probation light. So the student's on thin ice, but they're still in good standing with the university. They could still study abroad. They could still apply to be in a fraternity or sorority. They basically aren't restricted in any way, as long as they don't have another incident while they're on that status. It's really making sure that our students understand what the next step up is from that, and that's disciplinary probation. That is where students really start to feel the effects, and that's where a student can be prevented from studying abroad, and most significantly for our freshman students, they are not able to join a fraternity or sorority while they are on disciplinary probation. So we really hope that our students avoid getting into that situation, but that's something where I think parents can really help in making sure that students understand the consequences of failing to comply with the policies of the university. Some other sanctions that may be imposed are basics, case management referral, uncompensated university service or essays or other educational sanctions depending on the incident. Parental notification is mandatory in any conduct matter when a student is found responsible for violating a drug or alcohol policy and they're under 21. I'm going to talk a little bit more about parental notification in a minute. And again, I'm just talking about some of the less serious matters. Of course, there are cases that can result in more serious consequences, but fortunately, very few of our students face those results. So the medical amnesty program is an exception to the conduct process where we want to encourage students to call when a friend is in need of support or to call for themselves when they're in need of medical attention. So this really reflects the university's commitment to increase the likelihood that a student will call for medical assistance for themselves or others. Students who call on behalf of a friend will not face conduct consequences for any drug or alcohol policy violations. and the student who is the one who's reported also will not face conduct consequences. They will face some other consequences, but there will be nothing on the disciplinary record. They will be required to meet with somebody from Student Resources and Support Services, and they'll also have to comply with follow-up from that meeting. This policy does not preclude students from facing other conduct consequences. So we do have cases where TENS is called and the student becomes combative, that they may face consequences for that. Again, those are a minority of cases, but just wanted to mention that. So talking a little bit more about our parental notification policy. At this point, you probably have all heard about FERPA, but that really provides that educational records of students are protected and private, even from parents. FERPA does create certain exceptions to that general rule, and that's where we've gotten our parental notification policy from. So first, if a student is under the age of 21 and has been found responsible through the university's conduct process, then parents will be notified. Same if they've been found responsible for drug violations. And then also if they've been found responsible to have engaged in a crime of violence. So something to keep in mind, I think, with those three is that that's generally going to mean that they will already have their hearing by the time that, that you're being notified. That's when FERPA permits us to make that notification. And so at that point, they'll already have gone through the conduct process. I think that you as a parent, to make sure that, that you're not finding out after the fact, may want to discuss this with them ahead of time and let them know that you really would want to find out before they were having that meeting with us. And that may be something that where you're able to know about it up front. And then the final time when we'll make parental notification is if the student or any university community member's safety is at risk, health or safety is at risk. And that's really a wide variety of circumstances. But we want to make sure that you're informed if your child's, if we've been informed that your child's health or safety is at risk. With respect to medical amnesty, the first time that a student, those cases really come in one of two ways. One is there's a call for medical assistance. TEMS responds. They examine the student and determine that the student is fine. The student does not need to be transported. The other is that they arrive, they determine that the student needs to be transported to the hospital. If a student is transported, a parent will be notified the first time. If a student is not transported, a parent won't be notified on the first occasion that we receive a report, but any subsequent alcohol or drug cases will result in parental notification. Conduct is the first offense that you're notified. So this gets us to substance abuse and misuse. So you may, I've mentioned being TEMS, I think, already, but this is really the term that our students use when TEMS is called to respond when a student has consumed too much alcohol. As I mentioned, there are two responses that TEMS will normally take, and that can have some implications on the parental notification. But in any one of these cases, the student will not be charged under the Code of Student Conduct, but they will be required to attend basics. Basics, for those of you who attended the Health Center webinar in August, is a two-session meeting. It's a one-on-one meeting that takes place over 2 sessions that's really designed to talk with the student about the choices that they're making around drugs or alcohol and hopefully guide them to a healthier direction, whatever that means for that student. It's evidence-based, and it's one of the only programs that's been found to be effective with a college-aged population. Some other things, some other resources for substance abuse or misuse, the WELL. If you didn't attend the presentation, the webinar that they did earlier this summer, I'm sure you can access that on the parents page. and I'm sure they went over a lot of detail. They also have information on their page about how you can talk with your son or daughter about drugs and alcohol. And we'd really encourage you to be proactive about that conversation and let them know what your expectations are. And then it mentions some questions that you may want to be asking just to gauge where your student is on this issue. If you are thinking that your student may have a problem and you want to know if a referral would be appropriate, we provided Megan Lavacari in the Wells phone number and would suggest that you contact her. But you can also always contact Student Resources and Support Services. If your son or daughter has a known or chronic substance abuse issue, please get in touch with us. We want to make sure that that student is connected and that we're aware of that so that we're able to make sure that that student is safe and healthy. So where can you go to make a report? If you have any concern, we would really encourage you to use our online reporting system. This system forwards the report in real time to the right people. The way that you can access that is tulane.edu/concerns. You should still report any emergency matters to TUPD. This really all gets back to that idea of creating a community of care. If someone is struggling on our campus, we want to know, whoever that report is coming from. To really be able to build this community of care, we all need to feel a responsibility to make these reports. If we don't know about something, we won't be able to respond to it. And it's possible you may have a missing piece to a puzzle, either about your child or about another person's child who's on campus here. The goal is always to get students the help that they need, no matter what that help is. So support without smothering. This is, I think, a really difficult balance to achieve. This is a huge transitional time for your child, but also for all of you. Developmentally, this is a time when students figure out who they are, and they are inevitably going to make some mistakes along the way. We'd really encourage you to allow your student to make his or her own mistakes and to pay the consequences. I mentioned before that this really is one of the last opportunities that they'll have to make those mistakes in a relatively safe environment where the consequences are probably going to be something that they can recover from. Once they graduate from college, that's not always going to be the case. So those are some important skills for them to learn while they're here. Set reasonable expectations with your child about communication. If you expect to talk to your child every day and they want to call you once a month, you're setting yourself up for some problems. Or if it's the other way around. It's better to have that honest communication about what your expectations are. And maybe that's not a regular phone call, but they text you regularly and trying to figure out where you can both agree. So that then you'll know if there's something wrong. If you haven't heard from them in a week, you'll know that that's a problem rather than you're just ducking your phone calls. Call us or email us any time of question. We know you do not need everything. I'm sure that at this point you've all heard the term helicopter parents, but we really don't buy into that. We view you as our partners. We want to work together to make sure that your children are successful here. If you notice sharp changes in the behavior of your student, talk to him or her about it, and then get in touch with us if you're not satisfied with that response. You know your child better than anybody, so trust your instincts. And we'd always rather have a report that turns out to be nothing than not get that report and not get that student the help that they need. So I'm going to tell you a few secrets, but I want to start by just telling you a little bit of a story to give you where I'm coming from. I started at Tulane in May 2012. And then when I was coming from being a practicing attorney and loved being on a college campus, loved my time in college and thought it was so much fun to be back, and felt really young again being here. And then I had my first child last September. I came back from maternity leave in the winter, and I was talking with a student, and he said, "I don't know how you do it having a kid so young." And I said, I'm really not that young, but thank you. And then as soon as the words came out of my mouth, I realized that he meant that my kid was so young, which is true. And in that moment, it really clicked for me that really my perspective now is much closer to all of yours. And so I can really at least begin to imagine how it feels to send your kid off to college. So these are some of the things that if I were in your position, I think you might want to know. Your student should know his or her resident advisor. Make sure that they do that. I'd check in with them about that. If you have an issue, it is always going to be best to start with the individual department. So housing and residence life is going to be the best place to start for a housing issue. And financial aid is going to be the best place to start with financial aid. You can move on if you're not getting a satisfactory response, but that's generally going to be the fastest way to address the issue that you have. Certain things are going to seem bureaucratic because they are. So please do not feel bad about asking for help or clarification with these processes. There's a lot of process at the university. The purpose of that is to make sure that we're being fair. We want to make sure that you're getting the help you need at navigating those processes. You can trust that we have the best interest of your student at heart because we do. A few more things. Financial aid and accounts receivable are different offices. This is a common question that we get. So if you have a question about a financial aid package, you're going to want to direct that to financial aid. If it's about your bill, then that's accounts receivable. Tuition bills come via email to the student, and if a student wants their parent to actually receive the email, then they're going to have to initiate that request. Email is Tulane's official form of communication. Students are not always great about checking their email, but they receive a lot of important information there. I can tell you that the Office of Student Conduct delivers messages to students by their email, and we often have students coming in saying, I didn't know about this, but they didn't read their email. And the same thing happens with other departments and offices on campus. So really make sure that that's something where you can really help, making sure that they're doing that. Involvement can be a double-edged sword. You're going to want to have your students involved in extracurricular activities, but they're going to need to find some balance. And so talk with them about that. That's not something that students always are able to figure out right away. Make sure that they're still able to focus on their classwork. And then finally, just to leave you with the fact that college can be the best of times and the worst of times. Your child is inevitably going to have difficult times, and that's what all of these offices, where they come in, and they're really here to help. I think a lot of students come to college expecting it to be the best time of their life. Part of the reason for this is that I think that parents or friends of parents, when they talk about college, they talk about it like it was the best time of their life. Because when we look back on these times, we're really looking back through rose-colored glasses, and we're not remembering feeling awkward or not fitting in, or getting our heart broken, or not making friends. So it's really a time that's full of ups and downs, and it's part of preparing for life. So it's normal for your student to be struggling, but if they are, know that there are all these offices here to help. So with that, I open it up for questions. We're just taking a minute to go through them. So one of the questions that we got was, is there help for students who are having a hard time meeting like-minded souls? The student loves his classes but feels out of place with students who are overindulging in alcohol. I think that this is something, it really would depend on what their interests are. There are lots of places for them to connect with other students to the point where I think, maybe for some students it can feel almost overwhelming, the number of groups and clubs and organizations. But I always think that that's a good place to start, figuring out what do they like to do. And there's probably a group on campus that is dedicated to that activity where they'll meet other like-minded people. Like if somebody's into video games, there's a video game club. If they're into running, there's a running club. The Riley Center is another place that I think is a really good place for students to go. That's our gym and activity center. They have intramural sports and fitness classes. And they also have actually outdoor programs. So there are really a lot of more health-focused classes. The Well is another place, I think, where a lot of students can get involved that really attracts some students who aren't as interested in some of these other activities. And one of the ways they can get involved is as a peer health educator. So I suggest they can reach out to the SAC, which is the Student Activity Center, or talk with their RA. Their RA would be a good resource for getting them connected. But if you find that they're really struggling, that's really something that student resources and support could help with, of making sure that they're making those connections.
There are also some just almost weekly events that students can take advantage of just to sort of create some habits of being around other students and taking advantage of some informal times to just connect with other students. And so almost every Friday there's a Fridays at the Quad, which is music and food out on the large quad. The dean of the undergraduate college has a coffee every Friday morning. And so there's some other things that are just very casual that don't require a whole lot of commitment if a student is feeling kind of shy about reaching out or getting involved. But if they just make a habit of attending things, then they're also more likely to just kind of start to meet people. We also have a series of programs that's called Tulane After Dark, and those are alcohol-free entertainment options that are sponsored by student organizations so that students will feel like there are things to do in the evening times or on the weekends that are fun and other ways to connect with other students that are certainly not going to involve alcohol. So looking on our calendars of activities and events for the things sponsored by Tulane After Dark is a good option to explore as well.
And you as a parent can go to look at the Tulane University calendar or the Student Affairs calendar to see programs that are going on, and there are tons and tons of them. So it's, I think, a question of figuring out the one that's the right fit. Another question, I think that this is mostly addressed, but what is the penalty for alcohol violations on campus? I'll tell you the standard penalties for that. For a first-time offense, where there aren't any extenuating circumstances, that would be an admonition, referral to the basics program, and parental notification. If there were other facts involved, there might be some additional consequences, but that would be your typical case. How are you informing students about the medical amnesty policy, and how are you encouraging them to call for medical assistance? We've put into every student who is who lives in residence halls a little pamphlet about very basic information about the Code of Student Conduct, parental notification, medical amnesty, and alcohol policy. And so that's one way. And then I think that really a primary way that this gets out is through RAs. I think this is something that RAs really emphasize. And that students, so that's, I think, really a primary way that they're getting that information. But I also think that word of mouth, students find out about this pretty quickly. How does the Code of Student Conduct apply when students are off campus? The Code of Conduct does apply to acts that occur off campus when the university has an identifiable interest. And so that's going to be fairly fact-specific, but certainly things that occur right in the vicinity of campus we will end up addressing. and the rules apply in the same way. Son filled out FERPA forms with with academic advisor and accounts receivable. However, he's been told per unit, and I want to submit these bills to my insurance company. Okay. So the question, I actually think it does matter if they're 17, but this is a parent who's asking, basically, do you need to have a FERPA with every single office? You don't. We can check with academic advising, but generally that's going to mean that there's a lag time. So I would always suggest if you need to talk with an office on campus, that you keep a copy of that you can then send along. Or alternatively, at least for our office, we will take written permission by email from a student directing that we speak with the parents about a certain matter. And I imagine some other offices will do that. The health services office may be less able to accept that. So I would encourage you that there just may be a delay where they have to go reach out to academic advising to get that information. For more detailed answers that are related to the health issues and those kinds of things, I would recommend that you look on our website for the archived recording of the other webinar that was done in August. So if you go to parents.tulane.edu, scroll down that page and you'll see a section that says archived webinars, and you can listen in and view that webinar for some more information there. And all the contact information for the Student Health Center is there as well, with some additional information about HIPAA rules and pharmacies and access to things, as well as contact information for other people and information about the insurance parameters. So I think that might help some of those questions that came up. It looks like we don't have other questions, so I just want to remind you again, we'll send a PDF of these slides out tomorrow to everyone who registered, and then give us a few days and we'll have the combined audio-video file linked to our website, which again is parents.tulane.edu. If you have any feedback about our webinars, we'd encourage you to email us at parents@tulane.edu, or if you have suggestions for topics that you'd like to see covered in future webinars, we're very open to that feedback. So if there are no additional questions, then we'll end our webinar here. Thank you so much for tuning in. That's a huge drop-off in the number of people who did it.